Excellent, thank you. Oh, didn't want to do that. Okay, so David, looks like you are the only person attending today, but this will be a recording for those within the group who weren't able to attend today. So basically, this is the first in 3 recordings that we're going to be, or 3 sessions that we're going to deliver on this particular assessment. And today we're just going to be looking at a bit of an introduction, get you started a little bit, thinking about things that you need to think about when you're putting this together. And then some opportunities as well for you to ask any questions. I mean, given that it's just you on the call today, Dave, then you can just ask questions as we go through anyway.
No problem. Fantastic.
Cool. So what I wanted to just draw attention to before we move on to all of that is obviously there's a deadline of the 14th of December here, which you need to sort of work towards. So make sure that you're scheduling towards that. It is a 5,000 word maximum word count here, so I'll talk a little bit about that today. If you need any support with the assignment, for example, if you want to, you can gain feedback on areas and so on before you submit your final. That's all possible. And obviously Shruti is absolutely fantastic and we'll be able to help you with any sort of admin or student support elements that you need. So if you want a reminder of deadlines, if you need copies of recordings and so on. So basically, the assignment is a brief, and in the brief there is quite a lot of information that you have on there, such as formatting. The individual task elements are on there as well. And there's also a section at the back for marking criteria. But before we get into that, I just want to talk a little bit about format. So this might be the first time you've done this. So it is a portfolio, and that does mean a professional standard. So you have 10 points allocated to your formatting, essentially. You do have quite a stringent word count, but there are ways of working around that or adding in content which will effectively give a little bit more application to your assessment that isn't included in the word count. So you do have to make sure that it's professional. I've sort of showcased a little example here. You've got a professional front cover, you've got a contents page, essentially. You'll have an introduction section, and then you need to sort of showcase information using visuals, using graphics, using sort of shorter paragraphs, essentially making sure that you've covered everything. Think about professional fonts as well. So what you're being asked to do here is to focus on a particular market, and in this case, it's vegetarian foods. So for this one, you do have to showcase quite a kind of combined mix of theory and practice. And what tends to happen is students are really good at the theory, but not so good at the practice. So they can bring in quite a lot of information about, you know, the DMP and so on, and all the different models, create those, talk about those, in more generic terms, but actually what you need to do is apply them to the practical situation, which is the vegetarian foods market. So in order to do that, hopefully today I will give you some insights on how you can do that effectively. But before we do, let's have a look at this sector. So it's a really interesting sector, and actually there's been some recent news within the industry in terms of McDonald's has actually stopped its contracts with Beyond Meat, which is this vegan burger supplier, and has decided to, in America, has decided to no longer have the vegan burger option on the menu because it's not been cost efficient, essentially, and hasn't hugely taken up. Now, this is in the American market. Whether that fluctuates to other markets is you know, remains to be seen. But I guess the point that I'm making here is this is a very changeable market. It's kind of in flux. There's a lot going on here. There's a lot of consumer behavior driving what's happening in this market. And then in return, there's a lot of industry behavior kind of driving and growing the market as well. So the thing that you need to be aware of here is very much the consumption of the vegetarian product or food that you decide to focus on. So it is online and offline. So again, with this market particularly, there's very different behavior patterns from online to offline in terms of consumption. There's a wide range of types here that you've got as well. So in terms of the range of products that you have to look at, I do recommend that you focus on one. So I don't mean one brand, I mean one segment area or range. So in this case, it can be plant-based. You could decide to do vegan. You could decide to do vegan milks. You could decide to do vegan meats, or you can break it down to a particular segment area or industry segment area to make it much easier for you to then provide more applied content in the word counts that you have. So there are lots of things happening in this market. There's a lot of depth from a behavioral level. So it's really important that you get that breadth of content in here and you kind of showcase that to the examiner. So that's what I was saying about application being so important for you on this basis, because if you do just generic theory around consumer behavior, that's not going to get you high marks. You'll just about pass, potentially may not pass with that kind of approach. You do need to have the application to this industry and what's happening from a consumption basis within this industry. So it is worth having a think about knowing the industry, doing a bit of background on the industry, and looking into kind of key areas and deciding actually this is, which area do you want to focus on, which is the most interesting for you. So in this case, I do recommend that the first step in your process is to do your introduction. Now, the introduction is usually about 3 pages long, and it's not included in the word count. Okay, so that is an opportunity for you to really have a look at this market. Start off your process of completing this assessment by analyzing and researching the market, looking at the bigger picture to start with. So, for example, a global picture, looking at the kind of variances between, let's say, America and these kind of key market leader areas, the UK, for example, as well, Australia, some of these key market leaders in this kind of changing environment, especially for vegan products. And then taking a step back and deciding, okay, actually, I'm going to now focus directly on the country that I want to focus on. So you can choose your local country or you can choose another country, essentially. But I do recommend that you segment it down to one country. And then from that, you can then sort of stipulate, and again, this is all happening in your introduction, you can then stipulate, I'm going to focus on vegan foods, or I'm going to focus on the vegan fish industry, or I'm going to focus on, vegan milk products, or I'm just going to focus on vegetarianism within this particular area. So if you do that, it will kind of give you that big introduction that you need to showcase to the examiner that you have looked at the wider market and you sort of siphoned it down to a country and a particular area. And you can kind of introduce that in the introduction section as you go along. So that kind of really helps you to start to get a picture of this industry as that kind of key step, the first step in putting this all together. So do remember essentially that, it is worth focusing on a particular area here. Otherwise, it's just going to be too broad and too large for you to consider. You are very much looking at behavior here as well. So there's lots of reasons why consumers have gone down this road, have gone to vegetarianism, flexitarianism, veganism, fresh food, plant-based, etc. So all of these different sort of trend areas and segment groups. But essentially, there are a few things that lead them. One is obviously the environment and concerns about the environment, essentially. And one is also about their health and well-being. Other roads to this particular segment or area or behavior is also based on allergies, essentially, has also driven this quite a lot, especially with sort of vegan and plant-based milks. So that's the industry that you're looking at, and like I said, it is very vast. So the first step in the process is do your research and then decide what country you're going to focus on and what area you're going to focus on in that introduction. And as I said, the introduction is about three pages and not included in the word count. So the other thing that I sort of mentioned before, but I just want to kind of emphasize a little bit more here, is the theory and practical. So it really is half and half. When you start getting into your answer content, you've really got to think about, okay, I'm going to talk about the DMP, essentially the decision-making process, but I'm going to showcase it or I'm going to support it with content that's very applied. So what I will do is go through each one and kind of give you an idea of how that can happen. So for example, as we said about the DMU in this one and the buyer persona, so you can talk about the theory behind the DMU, trains of thought around that theory, and also about showcasing and developing a persona. But you must make sure that you support that with your research findings. So when you're doing your persona, the theory will be the showcase of where did that information come from, statistical websites, it might be internal content or whatever it is that you have. In terms of the DMU as a concept, you're going to have, again, theoretical references here. So that's textbooks, etc. And in terms of the application side of things, that's where you can use supporting content. So what I mean by that is, for example, you can have a table which showcases all the stages of the DMU, and you might have an online column and an offline column. And within that, you'll showcase real examples from the industry as to what's happening at these stages of the DMU from a direct industry perspective. So that is supporting content because it's an additional table. And so it's not included in the word count, but actually it gives a really good depth of application to the industry, and it's quite a nice way of doing it. So that's what I mean about this kind of 50-50 theoretical and sort of application based. Now the buyer persona as well. So for example, one buyer persona will be included in the word count because it's part of the answer content. However, if you add in any other buyer personas to kind of showcase a variance, so again, for some analysis depth, showcase, okay, actually there's actually, 3 different personas in this market, but I'm going to focus on the primary persona here with the rest of my content. The second and third persona would not be included in the word count. That would be considered supporting content. So again, it allows you a little bit of depth of content here. It allows you to kind of go in a bit further into this market, the different types of behaviors that you have from the different types of segment, but it's not eating up your word count because, as I said, anything beyond one persona outline is considered supporting content. And these are all, these are sort of up to you, really. It depends on the grades that you want to get, but the extra kind of application effort here and adding and spending a bit more time in this supporting content development is what essentially will get the higher grades. So again, same sort of process, if you like, with the decision-making model. So it's kind of sort of having a look at the decision-making model, the theories behind it, kind of explaining the theories behind it and its kind of relevance to consumer behavior, and then maybe again doing a table with the decision-making process steps from a model of your choice, and effectively looking at online and offline and what's happening in terms of all of the steps from consumer behavior directly within the market that you're looking at. With the reference groups, lifestyle, consumer identity, and paid influencers, this is slightly different. So this is going to be quite support heavy in terms of showcasing examples of, if you can, especially with paid influencers, there's lots of examples out there. Lifestyle, again, showcasing visuals, showcasing examples to kind of support the lifestyle comments that you're making. It's really important that you understand the theory behind this. So reference groups is not paid influencers, etc. You've got to really be clear about what these influences are and the kind of variations between them. So one thing is reference groups is not word of mouth or one, essentially. So you do need to sort of make sure that you understand the theory. You will have to look into the theory behind influencers, essentially, or the influence of all of these elements that you've been asked to identify. So again, this will be quite clear in your word count. You will have a kind of split section for each, so they do need to be equally weighted, but you can really showcase the application through examples, essentially through tables. You can look at different reference groups and their influence for online and offline and so on. Because remember, you've got to look at online and offline in everything. So having these tables showcasing the variance is good for analysis marks, but also good for ensuring you cover online and offline. And then culture. So culture, again, slightly different. You're going to have a wider range to start with to showcase that global cultural influence, if you like, and the kind of variances between cultural influences from a consumer behavior perspective, but then hone back into your local country's culture, and effectively the kind of online and offline behavior attributing from that culture, or effectively impacting the consumption within the market that you've chosen. This will be as well support heavy, so you will have images, you will have potentially tables or examples to back up what you're putting forward. Now, recommendations are slightly different, so you change tact here a little bit. So the others are all about consumer behavior and consumption specifically, and that really is the core focus here. The practical recommendations is when you start to put your marketing hat back on and you sort of say, okay, actually now I can talk about recommendations of what marketing activity should happen. How can we make this a customer first approach? What things can we put in place? Now, you do have to decide on a company here. So you might want to think about choosing a company that you're recommending for. So if you want to, you can choose one of the companies you've identified in the industry, Or you can choose the scenario whereby you are helping a new company launch into the market. So your recommendations would be based on that. What do they need to consider? 2 or 3 recommendations that they need to consider in order to launch into this market based on the consumer behavior elements that you've identified. If it's as I said, if you choose a company that's already within the market, you'll have to sort of justify what they're currently doing and recommendations for improvement on what they're currently doing based on the research that you've identified, essentially. So you've got those 2 scenarios that you can choose from, but you must make that clear in the recommendations first. So this is the scenario, and here are my 2 or 3 recommendations based on that. And they do have to be justified. So you're going to have to justify your choices and showcase the benefits of the choices and how they're going to impact the company in a positive way based on the research that you've done. So that is the assessment elements and a few hints and tips there on things that you need to consider. There will be a recording of this and you can watch it again to kind of help you with each section. So you're sort of making sure you're starting off on a really good foot. So with this one, I just wanted to bring out the marking criteria. So this is what you're marked against. And there are, lots of keywords in here. This is the distinction criteria, obviously. And there's keywords like analyze, synthesis, essentially. Presentation is outstanding, and so on. Synthesis of reference materials from a wide range of sources. So if you're looking for the top marks, you do need to showcase a wide range of theoretical and real world research. You do need to provide that synthesis, which means you're looking at this market, you're looking at the research, and you're coming up with your own thoughts. What do you think are going to be the driving consumer trends? What do you think is going to be the change in consumer behavior, essentially, with consumption? If you can identify that, what do you think is the biggest impact? So it is about what you think. That's really important as part of this at this level. It's not sort of regurgitating content that you might do at a lower level. This is actually about doing the research, looking at the market, and then coming up with your own assumptions and ideas and questions as to the sorts of things that are important that you've identified. So that's synthesis. We will talk a little bit more about this criteria later and what outstanding refers to and so on. But for now, I just wanted to give you a bit of an outline to get you started, really thinking about that introduction, allowing you to do a bit of wider research. So it really is a good first thing to do because it will give you some really nice insights into the industry. And then as you sort of start to progress with each element, remember that kind of supporting content, the online, offline is really important, and just kind of working through each section that I've spoken about today. So it is, as I said, avoid description. You're not just describing a situation, you're actually analyzing situations, you're actually providing your own thoughts as to what's happening in that situation and so on. And it is really important that you effectively keep asking questions as well of me in terms of if you're a bit confused as to what you need to put in here, or you want to ask any questions about the sort of content direction, or you want me to have a look at one section or a few sections of your answer, I can do that. So you can use that as a resource to help you. So as you're working through, you can send me a copy of each section and saying, okay, I feel this is done. Can I get your feedback on this? I can then give you feedback and help you either improve or add elements or sort of point out elements that are missing or how you can maybe apply more and so on. So that is available to you guys. So before I sort of go into process a little bit, have either of you got any questions at the moment?
I do, Jessica.
Yeah.
Quick one with the recommendations. When we're doing the research on, say, a brand or business, any suggestion on or any recommendation in terms of how long we have to look at, if it's an existing company or brand, how far back do we have to go with the research?
Not very far, because you only have to state it in the scenario, so you don't have a lot of words to play with. So you're basically indicating who you've chosen, and then your recommendations will be based on the back of that. Your recommendations are going to be more closely linked to the research that you've done, and you do need to have a bit of an insight as to what you think the gap is or the problem is with the current company delivery. So that's what you need to know, but you don't need to know history. You don't need to provide anything like that. No.
The recent couple of months is right then.
Yes, yeah, no, that's fine. And I would also I mean, you just need to give a characteristics outline really of what it is.
Alright.
Who is it? I would recommend, if you are going to choose an organization, to maybe choose one that's relatively new in the market, because you'll be able to identify more gaps of things that they could be
Absolutely.
improving. If you go for some of the big, big players, although interestingly enough, Beyond Meat was one of the biggest players within the vegan market, and unfortunately, due to their misunderstanding of the consumer behavior behind veganism, essentially, and health, and freshness, and fresh ingredients, etc., and moving away from processed foods being a core driver of that behavior, they have now come into a position where they are struggling, because there's so much information out there now saying that their products are actually just processed, sort of, more chemical based, etc., which kind of defeats the whole purpose. So they are getting a backlash from that. So you could effectively kind of choose Beyond Meat as an example of things that they could be doing differently, because they are in trouble now. So, but yeah, sometimes it's easier
Got
just to
you.
go with a small player. If
So
that
there's no
makes
need to drop out a guru like on SEMrush. Got you.
sense. Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
fantastic. That's what I wanted to check. Perfect.
No, that's fine.
Uh,
Any other questions at the moment?
Yes, just one.
Okay.
What is the difference between a portfolio and a report? I'm not sure to understand it.
They are quite similar. A report is more about the factual position of the situation. A portfolio allows you to bring in more of your own thoughts, essentially, and also provide more visual content, and kind of supporting content to showcase the application depth. So a report will be, right, I'm reporting on a situation, whereas a portfolio is more about looking at a situation and then analyzing the situation, then coming up with, and I guess the synthesis element is what makes the biggest variable here. You don't tend to have a lot of synthesis in a report, essentially, because you're just reporting on what's happening, as opposed to actually putting your own opinions and thoughts, and ideas as to what that means. Does that make sense?
Yes. Does that mean that we should bring some opinion of ours in the
I think so.
portfolio?
Yeah, I think so. And that's sort of the synthesis. You could, if you want to, one thing that's quite nice, maybe to really showcase that you have thought about, you could essentially do a little box out for each, again, which could be supporting a little box out for each of the sections, which could be called synthesis, or could be called essentially not recommendations, but key insights.
Mhm.
And then you could list the key insights that you've identified and what you think they mean. And actually that would really showcase a very concise delivery of synthesis there for each point.
And just another question about the presentation. Is the presentation different because it's a portfolio, or is it like a report, like normal?
No, they're fairly similar in that regard. And because you've got sort of key sections to cover, we do recommend that you just clearly showcase each section. So you've got sort of a front cover, essentially a contents page similar to a report, and then you'll have your 3-page introduction. And then from that, you might then showcase each section with a clear heading, so that it's very clear to the examiner where each section starts and finishes. From that, sounds like someone's drilling. From
Yeah,
that,
I'm sorry.
no, it's fine. From that, you've then got, it's just got to look professional, because obviously marks are allocated to that, but things like grammar is part of that 10 point of marks that you get for presentation as well.
Okay.
But Sophie, this is something that I can help with as well. So if you want to send it to me before you submit it as final, I can check it, look at the formatting, suggest recommendations of how it could be improved, and so on. So the draft feedback is quite useful for you guys, especially if you're kind of pushing for the big marks, and the amount of work you have to put into this, it's almost worth doing just to see if you can, get extra marks out of that process.
Okay, thank you.
Brilliant. No problems at all. Okay, so just as a quick reminder then, the deadline date for this is obviously the 14th of December. So do put that in your diary and sort of work backwards. We will have another 2 sessions before that. where I will talk a little bit more in depth in the next one about the industry, but also about this looking at kind of best practice examples, if you like, and things that you can consider in each of the sections. And then the last session will be about refining, quick reminders of a few things so you can kind of double check against your sort of final piece of work. If you do have any questions, please don't hesitate to email me at jessica@digitalmarketinginstitute.com. Or if you've got any processing questions, Shruti is absolutely the best person to talk about that, or any sort of administration side of things. How do I upload my assessment? How do I access resources, etc., etc.? Can I have a copy of presentations and this, that, and the other? So the next session is on the 2nd of November. So if you can pop that in your diary. By that session, it would be good to have a very strong introduction, an understanding of the industry, and maybe a brief outline of each of the sections that you're going to be putting together. That's quite a strong place to be, essentially, by that session. Then after that, we can go into a little bit more depth, as I said, into each section, looking at some best practice, which can then help you refine the content and kind of develop the fuller answers for each element. Brilliant.
Sounds good.
Excellent. Great. So before I end the session today then, and wish you good luck with the next phase, any more questions before I go?
Not from my side.
Nope. All right. Brilliant. Well, as I said, best of luck. And if you do have any questions, me and Shruti are both here to help you. So it is quite a big undertaking. So please do ask us. We've got lots of resources that we can help you with and so on. Great. All right. Well, thank you very much for attending and for the good